Years later, when the teacher lay in a hospital bed, the boy walked in wearing a white coat, and everyone in the room froze. Howard Mitchell's boots crunched against the gravel path leading to the river. The morning air bit at his face as he walked, his fishing rod bouncing slightly against his shoulder with each step. He checked his watch, 6:30 a.m., same as every other morning since Sarah died. The concrete bridge ahead stretched across the water, its gray surface already collecting fallen leaves. Howard's knees creaked as he climbed the slight incline to the bridge's walkway. He stopped halfway across, just like he always did, and looked down at the dark water below. "Morning, Mr. Mitchell," called a jogger passing by. Howard raised his hand in response but didn't turn around. He didn't remember the man's name anyway. The river flowed steady and strong beneath him. Howard gripped the metal railing, feeling its cold surface against his palms. 5 years without Sarah. 5 years of these silent morning walks, of cooking for one, of sitting in his empty house grading papers until he couldn't stand it anymore and finally retired last spring. He continued to the other side of the bridge, where a worn path led down to his usual fishing spot. The tall grass brushed against his pants as he made his way down. Howard set up his fold-out chair, arranged his tackle box, and cast his line into the water. The familiar routine required no thought, leaving his mind free to wander. A bicycle bell rang from the bridge above. Howard looked up, squinting against the morning sun. A boy rode past, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. Something about the way he pedaled caught Howard's attention. Too fast, too reckless. Howard watched as the boy made another pass across the bridge. There was anger in those movements, in the way he jerked the handlebars and stomped on the pedals. Howard recognized that kind of anger. He'd seen it plenty of times during his 30 years of teaching high school. The morning wore on. Howard caught nothing, but he hadn't really expected to. The fishing rod was just an excuse, a reason to be out here instead of sitting at home staring at Sarah's empty chair. Around noon, the sky began to darken. Howard looked up to see heavy clouds rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves in the trees along the riverbank. He should pack up, head home before the storm hit. Instead, he remained seated, watching the boy on the bridge make another pass. The kid had been going back and forth all morning. Howard had overheard enough conversations in the local diner to know who he was. Marcus Thompson, age 12. Lived with his mother in the small blue house on Oak Street. Father gone, mother working 2 jobs. The kind of situation Howard had seen too many times during his teaching years. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind gusted harder, whipping up small waves on the river's surface. Above, Marcus rode faster, his bike weaving slightly on the wet concrete. "Hey," Howard called out, standing up. "You should head home, son. Storm's coming." If Marcus heard him, he gave no sign. The boy hunched lower over his handlebars, pedaling harder. His bike swerved dangerously close to the railing. Howard's heart began to pound. Something was wrong. He'd seen that look before, that reckless abandon that came from pain or anger or both. He dropped his fishing rod and started up the bank, his old legs protesting the steep climb. "Marcus," he shouted. "Slow down." The wind howled across the bridge. Marcus's bike hit a wet patch and skidded. The boy overcorrected, jerking the handlebars. Howard watched in horror as the front wheel caught the base of the railing. Time seemed to slow. The bike flipped. Marcus's body flew over the railing. His scream cut through the wind. Howard ran. His chest burned. His joints screamed in protest. But he ran. He reached the railing just in time to see Marcus hit the water 30 feet below. Without thinking, Howard threw off his jacket. His body moved on pure instinct, decades of muscle memory from his years as a lifeguard during college summers. He climbed onto the railing. "Call 911, he shouted to a woman who had stopped her car on the bridge. Then he jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind rushed past his ears. The gray water rushed up to meet him. Howard had just enough time to think about Sarah, to wonder if he was about to join her. Then he hit the water. The cold shocked his system. The current grabbed him immediately, trying to pull him under. Howard fought against it, breaking the surface with a gasp. 20 feet downstream, Marcus flailed in the water. "Keep your head up," Howard shouted, swimming toward him. "I'm coming." Marcus went under. Howard dove. The murky water stung his eyes as he searched desperately in the gloom. His hand brushed against fabric. He grabbed it and pulled. They surfaced together, Marcus coughing and sputtering. The boy thrashed in panic, nearly pushing Howard under. "Stop fighting," Howard managed to say between gasps. "Let me help you." Whether from exhaustion or understanding, Marcus stopped struggling. Howard wrapped one arm around the boy's chest and began swimming towards shore with the other. The current fought them every inch of the way. Howard's muscles screamed. His lungs burned. The shore seemed impossibly far away. But he kept swimming, stroke after stroke, pulling them both through the freezing water. Finally, his feet touched bottom. Howard struggled to stand, still holding Marcus. They stumbled together through the shallows and collapsed on the rocky shore. Howard rolled onto his back, chest heaving. Rain began to fall, fat drops mixing with the river water on his face. Beside him, Marcus coughed up water. "You okay, son?" Howard asked when he could speak again. Marcus didn't answer. He curled into a ball, shoulders shaking. Whether from cold or crying, Howard couldn't tell. Sirens wailed in the distance. Howard sat up slowly, his entire body protesting the movement. He looked at the boy beside him, soaked, shivering, but alive. "It's going to be all right," Howard said, putting a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The boy flinched but didn't pull away. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights flashed on the bridge above. Howard heard car doors slamming, voices shouting. But he stayed where he was, his hand on Marcus's shoulder, as the rain fell around them. A woman's voice cut through the sound of the rain. "Marcus." "Oh my God, Marcus." Howard looked up to see a woman in a waitress uniform running down the bank, her shoes slipping in the mud. Marcus's mother. Her face was tight with fear and something else, suspicion, maybe, as she looked at Howard's hand on her son's shoulder. Howard pulled his hand away and struggled to his feet. His wet clothes weighed him down, made him feel every one of his 65 years. "Is okay," Howard said as Marcus's mother reached them. "But he should get checked out." The water dash, she ignored him, gathering Marcus into her arms. "What happened?" she demanded, looking between Howard and her son. "What were you doing up there?" Before either could answer, the paramedics arrived, surrounding them with questions and blankets and medical equipment. Howard stepped back, watching as they led Marcus and his mother to the waiting ambulance. Just before they loaded him in, Marcus looked back. Their eyes met briefly. Then the ambulance doors closed, and Howard was alone again in the rain. He looked up at the bridge where it had all started. Marcus's bike still lay against the railing, front wheel bent at an impossible angle. The woman who had called 911 was talking to a police officer, gesturing animatedly. Howard's whole body ached. He was cold down to his bones. But as he watched the ambulance pull away, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. He didn't know why Marcus had been riding so recklessly, what pain or anger had driven him to the bridge that day. But Howard recognized the look in the boy's eyes. He'd seen it in his own reflection every morning since Sarah died. A police officer approached, notebook in hand. "Sir, we need to take your statement." Howard nodded, water dripping from his gray hair. The rain was falling harder now, but he barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead, wondering about Marcus, hoping the boy was truly okay, wondering what would happen next. The day had started like any other. Now, standing on the riverbank in his soaked clothes, Howard Mitchell had a feeling nothing would be the same again. The emergency room lights buzzed overhead as Howard sat on the examination table, still wearing his wet clothes. A young doctor shined a light in his eyes. "Follow the light," the doctor said, moving it back and forth. "Any dizziness? Shortness of breath?" "I'm fine," Howard said. "How's the boy?" "Mr. Mitchell, please focus on the light." Howard did as he was told, but his mind kept drifting to the curtained-off area across the ER where he'd seen them take Marcus. He could hear muffled voices from that direction, including what sounded like Marcus's mother arguing with someone. The doctor lowered the light. "Well, your vitals are stable, but at your age, jumping from that height into cold water was extremely dangerous. You could have had a heart attack. Or dash. Is Marcus okay?" Howard interrupted. The doctor sighed. "I can't discuss another patient's condition. But you should be proud. What you did was incredibly brave." Howard shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the doctor said, making a note on his clipboard. "They wouldn't." A commotion erupted from behind the curtain. Howard heard Marcus's mother's voice rise. "I don't care what you think happened. My son needs rest, not questions." Two police officers emerged from behind the curtain, looking frustrated. They spotted Howard and headed his way. "Mr. Mitchell," the older officer said, "we need to go over your statement again." The doctor stepped between them. "My patient needs rest." "This won't take long," the officer insisted. "Mr. Mitchell, you said you were fishing when you saw the boy riding his bike." "That's right." Howard's wet socks squished inside his shoes as he shifted on the table. "I'd seen him making passes across the bridge all morning." "And what made you think he was in trouble?" "The way he was riding. Too fast for the conditions. When the storm started coming in dash." "Did you interact with him before the incident?" Howard frowned. "No. I called out to him to be careful, but I don't think he heard me." The younger officer was taking notes. "Several witnesses reported seeing you watching the boy throughout the morning." Howard's stomach tightened. He knew where this was going. He'd seen enough in his teaching career to recognize when people were looking for something sinister in simple concern. "I was fishing," he said firmly. "The bridge is directly above my usual spot. Of course I saw him." "And you had no prior contact with Marcus Thompson? Never spoke to him before?" "No. I knew who he was from town gossip. That's all." Howard met the officer's eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The older officer held up his hands. "Just doing our due diligence, sir. A young boy nearly drowns. A stranger just happens to be there." "A stranger who saved his life," the doctor interrupted. "Now, if you're done, my patient needs to rest and change into dry clothes." The officers exchanged looks but backed off. As they left, Howard heard one of them mutter something about unusual circumstances. The doctor handed Howard a set of scrubs. "Change into these. I'll be back to check on you in a bit." Left alone, Howard peeled off his wet clothes slowly, his muscles protesting every movement. The fall and swim had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. As he pulled on the scrubs, he heard more voices from Marcus's area. "Mom, I'm fine." Marcus's voice, stronger now. "Can I just go home?" "Baby, they need to keep you for observation. That water was filthy, and you swallowed a lot of it." "But dash, no buts. And when you're better, we're going to have a long talk about what you were doing on that bridge." Howard finished changing and sat back on the examination table. His thoughts drifted to Sarah. She would have known exactly what to say in this situation. She always did with troubled kids. It's what made her such a good guidance counselor. A nurse came in with discharge papers. As Howard signed them, he asked, "Can I at least know if the boy is going to be okay?" The nurse glanced around, then lowered her voice. "He'll be fine. They're keeping him overnight for observation. But there's no serious injury." Relief flooded through Howard. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell." The nurse hesitated. "What you did? My brother's a lifeguard. He says jumping from that height into that current, most people wouldn't have survived it, let alone manage to save someone else." Howard just nodded, not knowing what to say. He hadn't thought about survival or odds in that moment. He just acted. As he gathered his wet clothes into a plastic bag, he heard new voices from Marcus's area, deep, official-sounding voices asking questions about Marcus's home life, his behavior, his father's absence. Howard recognized the tone from his teaching days. Social services. He walked slowly toward the ER exit, his body aching with every step. Through a gap in the curtain, he caught a glimpse of Marcus sitting up in bed, looking small and scared as his mother argued with a woman holding a clipboard. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. But then his mother noticed Howard and quickly pulled the curtain closed. Outside, the storm had passed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot. Howard realized he had no way to get home. His car was still parked by the river. "Need a ride?" He turned to see the young doctor who had examined him, keys in hand. "I'm off shift," the doctor said. "And you shouldn't be walking that far after what you've been through." Howard accepted gratefully. During the drive, the doctor kept glancing at him like he wanted to say something. Finally, he spoke. "Those cops, they were way off base. Anyone could see you're just a good man who did a brave thing." "People see what they expect to see," Howard said quietly. They drove past the bridge. City workers were removing Marcus's mangled bike from the railing. A small crowd had gathered to watch. "Small town," the doctor said. "By tomorrow, everyone will have their own version of what happened." Howard knew he was right. He'd lived in this town long enough to know how quickly stories spread, how easily facts got twisted. He could already imagine the whispers starting. What was that old man really doing down by the river? Why was he watching that boy? Why did he get involved? The doctor pulled up in front of Howard's house. Take it easy for a few days. No more heroic jumps off bridges. Howard managed a small smile. No promises. Inside his dark house, Howard stood in the entrance hall, dripping river water from his plastic bag of clothes. Sarah's photos watched him from the walls. For the first time in years, he felt like those photos held more than just grief. You would have known what to do next, he said to Sarah's smiling face. You always did. He went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. His body ached, but his mind was racing. Something about Marcus's face in that hospital bed kept coming back to him. The look of a kid carrying too much weight alone. Howard had seen that look too many times in his teaching career to ignore it. But he'd also learned the hard way that good intentions weren't always enough. Sometimes trying to help only made things worse. The coffee maker gurgled as thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching. Howard thought about Marcus in the hospital, about the social services worker with her clipboard, about the suspicion in his mother's eyes. He should stay out of it. Let the proper authorities handle whatever was going on with Marcus. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But as Howard poured his coffee, he knew he wouldn't. Maybe couldn't. Because when he'd seen Marcus on that bridge, he'd seen something of himself. That same desperate loneliness. That same pain looking for any way out. The rain started falling again, drumming against the windows. Howard sat at his kitchen table, holding his coffee cup in still trembling hands, and began to think about what came next. Across town, in a hospital room lit by fluorescent lights, a 12-year-old boy lay awake, listening to his mother's soft snoring from the uncomfortable chair beside his bed. Marcus touched the blanket covering him, warm, dry, safe. He thought about the cold river, the strong arms that had pulled him from it, the face of the old man who had jumped without hesitation. Two souls, connected by a moment of crisis, lay awake in the growing dark. Neither knew that this was just the beginning, that their lives had been set on a collision course that would change them both forever. 3 days after the river incident, Howard stood in the cereal aisle of Cooper's Market, pretending to read nutrition labels while actually listening to the conversation one aisle over. I heard the boy was trying to kill himself, a woman's voice said. Troubled home? You know. Well, I heard that old Mitchell had been watching him for weeks, another voice replied. Hanging around the bridge every day. Seems suspicious if you ask me. Howard put the cereal box back on the shelf. His hand shook slightly. He'd been hearing variations of these conversations all over town, each version darker than the last. Morning, Mr. Mitchell. Howard turned to see Jenny Cooper, the store owner's daughter, standing there with a clipboard. She'd been one of his students 5 years ago. People are talking nonsense, she said quietly. Dad and I know you. You taught half this town's kids, including me. Thanks, Jenny. Howard managed a smile. How's college going? Good. Listen. She glanced around and lowered her voice. Marcus Thompson was in here yesterday with his mom. He asked about you. Howard's heart jumped. He did. Wanted to know if you shop here. His mom shut him down pretty quick, though. Practically dragged him out. The store's front door chimed. Howard looked up to see Marcus's mother entering, still wearing her waitress uniform from the morning shift. Their eyes met. She quickly looked away and headed for the opposite end of the store. I should go, Howard said to Jenny. Outside, the October wind cut through his jacket. Howard walked slowly down Main Street, past the diner where Marcus's mother worked, past the elementary school where kids were playing at recess. He found himself heading toward the bridge without consciously deciding to. A police car crawled past him, the officer inside watching him too intently to be casual. Howard kept walking. He'd done nothing wrong. The bridge looked different in daylight. Workers had repaired the damaged railing, but Howard could still see faint scuff marks where Marcus's bike had hit. He stopped at the spot where he'd jumped. Mr. Mitchell. Howard turned. Marcus stood 15 feet away, wearing a too-big hoodie and carrying a backpack. School must have let out early. You shouldn't be here, Howard said, but his voice was gentle. I wanted to say thank you. Marcus took a step closer. For saving me. Anyone would have done the same. Marcus shook his head. No, they wouldn't. I heard the doctors talking. They said most people would have died jumping from here. Howard looked at the boy more carefully. The dark circles under his eyes, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, the tension in his shoulders, all signs Howard recognized from his teaching days. Are you okay, son? He asked quietly. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but a shout cut him off. Marcus! His mother ran up, grabbing his arm. What did I tell you about talking to strangers? He's not a stranger, Mom. He saved my life. Get in the car. Now. She pointed to her beaten-up Honda parked nearby. Mrs. Thompson, Howard started. I just want to help Dash. Help? She turned on him, eyes flashing. Like all those other white folks who wanted to help over the years. Who called social services every time Marcus had a scraped knee. Who tried to say I was an unfit mother because I worked 2 jobs. That's not what I Dash. I know what people in this town are saying. About Marcus. About me. About you. She stepped closer, voice low and intense. Stay away from my son. I mean it. She marched Marcus to the car. The boy looked back once, but his mother quickly turned his head forward. Howard watched them drive away. His hands gripped the railing where he'd jumped, knuckles white. Everything okay here? A police car had pulled up. Officer Reed, the same one who'd questioned him at the hospital, got out. Just fine, Howard said. Kind of a coincidence, running into the boy here. Not really. It's a small town. Reed studied him. You taught school a long time, didn't you, Mr. Mitchell? 30 years. Ever have any complaints about your behavior with students? Howard's jaw tightened. No, never. Because we've been asking around Dash. Then you know I have a spotless record, Howard cut in. 30 years of teaching, coaching, mentoring. You want to check? Go ahead. But don't stand there and imply things about me. Reed held up his hands. Just doing my job. Making sure everyone's safe. Safe, Howard repeated. Was anyone keeping Marcus safe before he ended up in that river? Were you? The officer's face hardened. Watch yourself, Mr. Mitchell. Good reputation or not, things can get difficult for people who don't mind their own business. He got back in his car and drove away. Howard stayed at the bridge for a long time, watching the river flow beneath him. That evening, Howard sat in his living room, grading papers out of habit even though he was retired. The TV played quietly in the background. A knock at the door startled him. Jenny Cooper stood on his porch, holding a paper bag. Dad wanted me to bring you some groceries. Said you left without getting what you needed earlier. That's very kind. But Dash, he also said to tell you that Marcus's mom, Lisa, works the late shift at the diner on Thursdays. She leaves Marcus alone because she can't afford a sitter. Jenny gave him a meaningful look. Dad says maybe someone should keep an eye out. Make sure he's okay. You know, from a distance. Howard took the bag. Thank you, Jenny. And thank your father. After she left, Howard sat at his kitchen table, thinking. He knew he should stay away. The whole town was watching, waiting for him to make one wrong move. But he couldn't shake the image of Marcus on that bridge, the desperation in his writing, the look in his eyes that Howard recognized all too well. Sarah's voice seemed to whisper in his mind. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking a risk. He got up and went to his old study. Boxes of teaching materials filled the shelves, 3 decades worth of lesson plans, exercises, methods for reaching troubled kids. Howard had packed them away after retiring, thinking he was done with all that. Now he opened a box and began sorting through papers. If he was going to help Marcus, he'd have to be smart about it. Careful. He couldn't approach directly. Not with the police watching, not with Lisa Thompson's understandable suspicion. But he'd spent his entire career finding ways to help kids who needed it, working within the system while quietly subverting it when necessary. He could do it again. Howard worked late into the night, making plans, writing notes, thinking through every angle. On his desk, next to Sarah's photo, he placed the newspaper clipping about Marcus's bike accident. The headline read, "Local man saves boy in river drama." Drama, Howard thought. They had no idea. The real drama was just beginning. Across town, Marcus lay in bed, listening to his mother get ready for her late shift. He held something under his pillow, a crumpled paper with Howard Mitchell's address, copied from the phone book at the library. He didn't know what he was going to do with it yet, but having it made him feel less alone. 2 lives, already changed by one moment on a bridge, were about to become more deeply entwined than either could imagine. And in a small town where everyone watched and whispered, where suspicion grew like weeds through sidewalk cracks, the consequences would ripple out far beyond the river's banks. Howard sat in his car outside the diner, watching the Thursday night crowd thin out. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept his hands wrapped around the cup, trying to stay warm in the October chill. Through the windows, he could see Lisa Thompson moving between tables, coffee pot in hand. She'd been on shift for 10 hours already. According to Jenny Cooper's information, she had another 4 to go. His phone buzzed. A text from Jenny. Mom drove by Marcus's house. Lights still on. He's alone. Howard put the phone down and rubbed his face. He'd been sitting here for 3 hours, debating what to do. The smart move would be to drive home, forget about all of this. But he couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's face on the bridge, or the sound of his mother's voice when she'd said she couldn't afford a sitter. A tap on his window made him jump. Officer Reed stood there, flashlight beam pointed into the car. Howard rolled down his window. "Evening, officer. Kind of late to be sitting in a parking lot, isn't it, Mr. Mitchell's? Free country. Just having some coffee." Reed's flashlight beam moved around the car interior. For 3 hours? So they were watching him. Howard met the officer's eyes steadily. "I like to take my time. Mrs. Thompson filed a complaint," Reed said. "Says you've been harassing her son." "That's not true. Says you approached him on the bridge last week." "He approached me to say thank you for saving his life, if you remember that part." Reed leaned closer to the window. "Listen, Mitchell. Maybe you did a brave thing that day. Maybe you're just a concerned citizen. But right now, you're looking like a problem." "The only problem," Howard said quietly, "is that a 12-year-old boy nearly died, and everyone's more worried about appearances than finding out why. That's not your concern." "No." Howard started his car. "Then whose is it?" He drove away, leaving Reed standing in the parking lot. But instead of heading home, he took a detour past Oak Street. The small blue house where Marcus lived was dark except for one window. Through it, Howard could see the flicker of a TV screen. He parked a block away and watched. No movement in the house. No other cars on the street. Just a 12-year-old boy, alone until midnight. Howard reached for his phone, then stopped. Who would he call? The police? They'd already made their position clear. Social services? They'd been and gone, finding nothing actionable about a single mother working legal jobs to support her son. A memory surfaced. His last year of teaching, a student named Tommy who kept falling asleep in class. Howard had discovered the boy was working nights at a gas station, trying to help his family make rent. Instead of reporting it, Howard had started bringing extra food to school, tutoring Tommy during lunch so he could sleep during study hall. Sometimes helping meant working around the system, not through it. Howard got out of his car, grabbed a folder from the back seat, and walked to Marcus's house. He stood on the porch for a long moment, then knocked. Silence, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, security chain still in place. Marcus's eye appeared in the gap. "Mr. Mitchell." "Hello, Marcus. May I come in?" The boy hesitated. "Mom says I'm not supposed to talk to you." "I know, but I brought something you might want to see." Another pause. Then the door closed, chain rattled, and opened fully. Marcus stood there in oversized pajamas, looking younger than his 12 years. "Just for a minute," he said. Howard entered a small living room lit only by the TV. Dishes filled the sink in the visible kitchen. Textbooks and papers were scattered across a coffee table. "Homework?" Howard asked, nodding at the books. Marcus shrugged. "Trying. Math is hard. Mind if I take a look?" They sat on the worn couch. Howard opened Marcus's math book, 7th grade algebra. The problem set was on polynomials. Howard remembered teaching this level during his early years, before moving to high school. "Here's your problem," he said, pointing. "You're trying to solve these all at once. Break them down into steps." He walked Marcus through one problem, then another. The boy was quick, picking up concepts as soon as they were explained clearly. What he lacked was confidence. "You don't need help with the math," Howard said. "You just need to trust yourself." Marcus looked down at his paper. "The other kids, they all get it so fast. And when I ask questions, they laugh. Let me show you something." Howard opened the folder he'd brought. Inside were old classroom photos, certificates, newspaper clippings. "See this boy? Bobby Martinez, class of '95. Everyone laughed when he struggled with math. Last I heard, he was designing rockets for NASA." Marcus leaned closer, looking at the photos. "You kept all these? 30 years of teaching. You learned to keep track of the ones who prove everyone wrong." A car passed outside. Marcus tensed until it was gone. They watched the house, he said quietly. The police. Ever since. Since the bridge. Marcus nodded. Mom says they are just waiting for her to mess up, so they can take me away. Howard's chest tightened. No wonder Lisa Thompson was so defensive, so protective. She wasn't just fighting current suspicions, but years of them. Marcus, he said carefully, what happened on the bridge? Why were you riding like that? The boy's shoulders hunched. Some kids at school, they said things. About Mom. About being the only black kid in class. Said I only got in because they felt sorry for me. And you were angry. I just wanted to feel something else. When I was riding fast, I didn't have to think about it. Howard understood. He remembered his own days after Sarah died, driving too fast on back roads, seeking anything to drown out the pain. I can help you with math, he said. Other subjects too. If you want. Mom won't let you. Then we don't tell her. Not yet. You can say you're studying at the library. Marcus looked at him suspiciously. Why do you want to help me? Because 30 years ago, I was a young teacher who thought he could change the world. Turn out I couldn't. But sometimes you can change one small piece of it. Headlights swept across the windows. Marcus jumped up. Mom's home early. Howard gathered his papers quickly. Back door. Marcus led him through the kitchen. As Howard slipped out into the night, the boy whispered, same time next week. I'll be here if you want me to be. Howard made it to his car just as Lisa Thompson's Honda pulled into her driveway. He drove home slowly, thinking about Marcus's face when they solved those math problems. The pride, the growing confidence. It was dangerous. What he was doing, if anyone found out, it would confirm every suspicion, validate every whispered rumor. His reputation, his standing in the community, everything he'd built over 30 years, all at risk. But as he parked in his driveway, Howard remembered something Sarah used to say. The right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing. Inside his house, he went to his study and pulled out more old teaching materials. If he was going to tutor Marcus secretly, he needed to be prepared. The boy had potential. Howard had seen it in his quick grasp of concepts, his eager questions. He worked late into the night, planning lessons, organizing materials. On his desk, Sarah's photo seemed to smile approvingly. Across town, Marcus lay in bed, holding one of the old photos Howard had left behind. It showed a group of students receiving academic awards, all of them beaming with pride. For the first time since the bridge, he fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Two people, separated by age and circumstance, had taken their first real steps toward each other. In a town full of watching eyes and wagging tongues, they had chosen trust over suspicion, hope over fear. The current they swam against was strong, but they were no longer drowning alone. The first signs of trouble came during lunch period. Howard was grading papers at his kitchen table when his phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Cooper. Marcus in fight at school. Bad. Howard grabbed his keys before the phone buzzed again. Mom not answering work calls. No other emergency contacts. He was halfway to his car when Officer Reed's cruiser pulled up in front of his house. Going somewhere. Mr. Mitchell. To the store. Howard lied, his keys digging into his palm. Reed got out of his car. Funny, because the middle school just called about Marcus Thompson being in an accident. They can't reach his mother. And you thought I'd be involved? Given your interest in the boy, we thought you might try to interfere. Howard's jaw tightened. Is he hurt? That's not your concern. Is he hurt? Howard repeated, louder this time. Reed's radio crackled. A dispatcher's voice came through. Unit 4, be advised. Situation at middle school escalating. Medical assistance requested. Howard moved toward his car. Reed stepped in his way. Move, Howard said quietly. Or what? Mitchell? You'll add assaulting an officer to your list of suspicious behaviors. Howard looked the younger man in the eye. My wife was a guidance counselor at that school for 20 years. Everyone there knows me. So either arrest me now, or get out of my way. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Reed stepped aside. I'll be right behind you, he warned. Howard drove just under the speed limit, Reed's cruiser close behind. His hands gripped the steering wheel as memories of his teaching years flooded back. Breaking up fights, dealing with bullies, trying to protect kids who had no one else to stand up for them. The middle school parking lot was full of emergency vehicles. Howard parked and walked quickly toward the entrance, Reed following close behind. Inside, he found controlled chaos. Students lined the hallways, whispering and pointing toward the gymnasium. Teachers tried to herd them back to classrooms. The gym doors were propped open. Howard could hear raised voices inside. He started it. No, Tommy pushed him first. Marcus just went crazy. Howard entered the gym. A small crowd had gathered around something on the basketball court. Through gaps between people, he caught glimpses. Marcus on the floor, blood on his face, a teacher pressing a cloth to his head. Everyone back. The principal, Mr. Waters, was trying to clear space. He spotted Howard and frowned. Mr. Mitchell, what are you doing here? I heard Marcus was hurt. His mother. We can't reach her. And you're not on his emergency contact list? No, but I am, a new voice said. Lisa Thompson burst through the gym doors, still wearing her waitress uniform. Her eyes found Marcus on the floor and she ran to him. Baby? What happened? Marcus tried to sit up. Mom, I'm sorry. They were saying things about you. And then Tommy pushed me, and I hit my head on the bleachers. He needs medical attention, the school nurse said. Possible concussion. Lisa looked lost. I don't. The insurance. I'll handle it, Howard said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Lisa's eyes narrowed. I don't want your help. Mom, please, Marcus said. Mr. Mitchell's been helping me. With math and stuff. After school sometimes. The gym went silent. Lisa stared at her son, then at Howard. Officer Reed stepped forward, hand moving to his belt. You been what? Lisa's voice was dangerously quiet. Mrs. Thompson, Howard said, I know how this looks. But right now, Marcus needs a doctor. Let me help. You can yell at me later. A tense moment passed. Then Lisa nodded once, sharply. The next few hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors and paperwork. Howard sat in the waiting room while doctors examined Marcus. Lisa paced, alternating between worried glances at the exam room door and angry glares at Howard. Finally, she dropped into the chair beside him. Talk, she said. Now. Howard told her everything. The tutoring sessions, the conversations about school, the way Marcus was starting to believe in himself. He's smart, Howard said. Really smart. But he needs someone to show him that being smart isn't something to be ashamed of. And you thought sneaking around behind my back was the way to do that. No, I thought giving him a safe space to learn was the way. Howard turned to face her. Your son is drowning, Mrs. Thompson. Not in the river this time, but in all the expectations and prejudices this town keeps piling on him. And you think you can save him? Again, I think he can save himself. He just needs someone to believe in him. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. When his father left, I promised myself I'd protect Marcus from people who'd hurt him. But sometimes I think I'm just teaching him to be afraid. Being careful doesn't mean being alone. The exam room door opened. A doctor emerged with Marcus, who had a bandage on his forehead. Minor concussion, the doctor said. He'll need rest and monitoring for the next few days. Lisa hugged her son carefully. We'll figure something out with work. I can watch him, Howard offered. During your shifts. Mother and son exchanged looks. Marcus spoke first. He really has been helping, Mom. My math grade went up 2 letters. And he tells me stories about his old students who made it big, even when everyone said they couldn't. Lisa studied Howard's face. Why? Why do you care so much? Because 30 years ago, I made a promise to myself to never walk away from a kid who needed help. Howard smiled slightly. And I'm too old to start breaking promises now. Another long moment passed. Then Lisa pulled out her phone and handed it to Howard. Put your number in, she said. But we're doing this my way. No more sneaking around. And the first time anything feels wrong. I understand. As Howard entered his number, Officer Reed appeared in the waiting room doorway. He looked between Howard and Lisa, clearly surprised to see them talking civilly. Everything okay here? Fine, Lisa said firmly. Mr. Mitchell is going to be helping Marcus with his schoolwork. Officially, Reed frowned. Mrs. Thompson, given the circumstances, Lisa cut in. I'm making decisions about what's best for my son. Unless you want to explain to your chief why you're harassing a volunteer tutor. Reed's face reddened. He backed away without another word. Later that evening, Howard sat in his study, updating his old lesson plans. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Marcus wants to know if you can help with science homework tomorrow. Says he has a test Friday. Howard smiled and texted back. What time? A moment later, after school. I'll pick him up at 5. Howard looked at Sarah's photo on his desk. Well, he said quietly, looks like I'm back in the teaching business. The next few weeks brought changes. Howard cleaned out his study, making space for tutoring sessions. Lisa started leaving grocery money, despite his protests. Marcus's grades improved steadily. More importantly, the boy began to smile more, to ask questions in class, to stand up straighter. When other kids made comments, he responded with facts and knowledge instead of fists. The town's whispers didn't stop entirely, but they changed tone. It was harder to spread malicious rumors about a retired teacher helping a student improve his grades, especially when that student's mother was openly supportive. Howard still caught Officer Reed watching his house sometimes, but the surveillance felt more routine than suspicious now. One evening, as Howard was helping Marcus with a history project, Lisa arrived early. She stood in the study doorway, watching them work. You know, she said, Marcus's father used to say education was just another way for the system to control us. That's why he left, said I was selling out by sending Marcus to their schools. Howard looked up. And what do you think? I think. Lisa smiled at her son, who was completely absorbed in his work. I think knowledge is power. And my boy's getting stronger every day. They shared a look of understanding. Then Lisa said, We're having dinner at the diner tomorrow. My treat. Consider it a thank you. As they left that night, Howard watched them from his porch. Marcus was telling his mother about the history project, gesturing enthusiastically. Lisa had her arm around his shoulders, listening with a proud smile. Howard went inside and added another photo to his wall of student successes. Marcus, grinning, holding up his first A+ math test. The current was still strong, but they were learning to swim together. Slower, Marcus said, watching Howard struggle with his physical therapy exercises. You're rushing it again. Howard lowered the light hand weight, sweat beading on his forehead. 2 weeks after his heart attack, every movement felt like a battle. When did you become such a taskmaster? He asked, trying to catch his breath. Marcus consulted the rehabilitation schedule he'd copied from Howard's doctor. Since I started reading about cardiac recovery, you need to build strength gradually. They were in Howard's living room, which had been transformed into a makeshift rehabilitation center. Lisa had helped rearrange the furniture to create space for exercises, and Marcus had taped medical diagrams of the heart to the walls. I've been looking up medical schools, Marcus said, adjusting Howard's arm position. Did you know the closest one is only 2 hours away? Howard managed a smile despite his fatigue. Planning my future care already. Someone has to. Marcus checked his watch. Okay, that's enough for today. Mom's bringing dinner after her shift. Howard started to protest, but Marcus cut him off. Doctor's orders. No arguing with medical professionals. You're not a doctor yet. Yet, Marcus agreed with a grin. The front door opened, and Lisa walked in carrying takeout bags. She'd started using the spare key Howard had given her for emergencies. How's our patient? She asked, setting the food on the coffee table. Stubborn, Marcus reported. Tried to do extra repetitions when he thought I wasn't looking. Howard Mitchell, Lisa scolded, but her eyes were amused. What did we say about following instructions? Howard eased himself into his armchair. I had 30 years of giving instructions. Never knew how hard it was to take them. They ate dinner together, a routine that had developed since Howard's release from the hospital. Lisa brought food from the diner. Marcus talked about school, and Howard felt less like a patient and more like part of a family. Show him, Lisa said halfway through the meal. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his backpack and handed it to Howard. It was a biology test, marked with a bright red A+. Top score in the class, Marcus said proudly. Teacher said my answer about cellular regeneration was remarkably advanced for this grade level. Howard studied the test, noting the detailed answers, the careful diagrams. You've been doing extra reading. The library has medical textbooks, Marcus said. Jenny helps me find the ones I can understand. Lisa watched them with a soft expression. Tell him your other news. Marcus straightened in his chair. The school's starting a medical science club next semester. They asked me to be president. Asked you? Howard raised an eyebrow at Lisa. She laughed. He might have submitted a very detailed proposal. With research. And a PowerPoint presentation. It's important. Marcus protested. We'll learn about basic medical procedures, health education, emergency response dash, slow down, Howard said, but his chest felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with his condition. One step at a time. That's what you always said about math problems, Marcus pointed out. Break them down into steps. This is just a really long problem. Howard looked at the boy. No. The young man, who had once been so unsure of himself, who had nearly been lost to the river's current. Now here he was, planning his future with the same determination he brought to everything else. Mr. Mitchell, Marcus's voice turned serious. When you had the heart attack, I felt helpless. I knew something was wrong but didn't know what to do. You did exactly right, Lisa said. You stayed calm, called for help dash. But I want to do more. Marcus met Howard's eyes. Next time, if there is a next time, I want to know exactly what to do. For anyone who needs help. Howard remembered another determined child, decades ago, himself, declaring to his parents that he was going to be a teacher, going to make a difference. Well, he said, seems like you found your calling. Later, after Lisa and Marcus had gone home, Howard sat in his study looking at old photos. He found one from his first year of teaching. Young, eager, full of dreams about changing the world. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Don't forget your evening meds. And no cheating on the sodium intake. Howard sent back a thumbs up, smiling. Maybe he hadn't changed the whole world, but he'd helped change one young man's world. And that young man might go on to change many more. The next morning, Jenny Cooper stopped by with groceries. Another routine that had developed since his heart attack. Brought your heart-healthy foods, she said, unpacking the bags. And some medical school brochures Marcus asked me to get. He's really serious about this, Howard said. Jenny arranged the brochures on his counter. You know what he told me yesterday? He said he used to think people like him couldn't be doctors. That it wasn't even worth dreaming about. And now he says if an old white teacher can believe in him, maybe he should believe in himself. Jenny smiled. You did that, Mr. Mitchell. You showed him what was possible. Howard picked up one of the brochures. I just opened a door. He's the one walking through it. That's what good teachers do, Jenny said. They open doors. After she left, Howard did his morning exercises, carefully following the schedule Marcus had made. His body still ached, but it was a different kind of ache now, the pain of healing, of growing stronger. He thought about the river, about the current that had nearly claimed them both. Life was like that sometimes, a strong flow trying to pull you under. The trick wasn't fighting the current alone, but finding people to help you swim. His phone buzzed again. A photo from Lisa, Marcus at school, demonstrating CPR technique to his classmates. The caption read, Future Dr. Thompson in training. Howard saved the photo to a special folder he'd created. Someday, he thought, when Marcus really was Dr. Thompson, they'd look back at these moments and remember how it all started. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Officer Reed. Mr. Mitchell, the officer said, looking uncomfortable. Just checking town policy on welfare visits to recent cardiac patients. Howard bit back a smile. Reed's attempts to maintain surveillance had grown increasingly transparent and increasingly apologetic. I'm fine, officer. My medical team has everything under control. Reed nodded, then hesitated. My nephew's in Marcus Thompson's class. Says the kid started some kind of medical science program. That's right. Good for him. Reed shifted his feet. Look, about before. I might have been too quick to dash. Water under the bridge, Howard said. Or over it. In our case. Reed actually smiled at that. Take care, Mr. Mitchell. And tell Marcus, tell him good luck with the medical stuff. As the officer drove away, Howard thought about how things had changed. The town's suspicion had slowly transformed into acceptance, then support. People who once whispered about his motives now asked about his health, offered help, celebrated Marcus's achievements. He did his afternoon exercises facing the window, watching snowflakes fall. Each movement was a step toward recovery. Just like each tutoring session had been a step toward Marcus's dreams, the current hadn't changed. Life's challenges never really did. But they were no longer swimming alone. They had built something stronger than suspicion, more powerful than prejudice. They had built a family. That evening, as Howard reviewed Marcus's latest biology homework, he found a note tucked between the pages. Thanks for not giving up on me. He pinned it to his wall next to Sarah's photo, where it belonged. Another milestone on a journey that had started with a fall from a bridge and led somewhere no one could have predicted. The healing waters, it turned out, weren't in the river at all. They were in the connections forged, the trust built, the futures opened up like doors waiting to be walked through. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Howard lay in bed, watching snow fall outside his window. 10 years had passed since that first heart attack, and his body was finally wearing down. Lisa sat in the chair beside him, pretending to read a magazine while actually watching his vital signs. "You don't have to stay," Howard said. "I'm sure the diner needs you. Retired last month, remember?" Lisa turned a page. "Besides, someone has to make sure you follow doctor's orders." Howard smiled weakly. At 7 to 5, he'd grown used to Lisa's mothering. She'd retired from waitressing to help care for him, despite his protests. "Any word from Marcus?" he asked. His residency director promised to let him come home early. "Should be here tonight." Lisa checked her phone. "Jenny's picking him up from the airport." Howard nodded, trying to hide his excitement. He hadn't seen Marcus in person for 6 months, not since the young man had started his medical residency 2 states away. Remember his first day of college? Lisa's eyes grew distant. Standing there in his new dorm room, trying to look brave. "While you cried in the car all the way home," Howard teased. "Like you weren't sniffling too." They shared a knowing look. They'd both been so proud that day. Marcus, first in his class, heading to pre-med with a full scholarship. A nurse came in to check Howard's vitals. "How are we feeling, Mr. Mitchell? Ready to go home?" "Not until your numbers improve." The nurse made notes on his chart. "Doctor will be in soon for rounds." After she left, Howard closed his eyes. The medication made him drowsy, but he fought to stay awake. He wanted to be alert when Marcus arrived. "Sleep," Lisa said softly. "I'll wake you when he gets here." Howard drifted off, dreaming of bridge railings and river currents and a boy who grew up to be so much more than anyone expected. A familiar voice pulled him from sleep. "BP's a little low. Have you adjusted his medication?" Howard opened his eyes to see a tall young man in a white coat studying his chart. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming. "Marcus." The young doctor turned, and Howard's heart swelled with pride. Marcus Thompson, M.D., read the name tag on his coat. "Hey, Mr. Mitchell." Marcus's professional demeanor cracked into a wide smile. "Or should I say, Patient Mitchell?" "You're early," Lisa said, hugging her son. "Caught an earlier flight. Couldn't wait." Marcus picked up Howard's chart again, this time with tears in his eyes. "Never thought my first case back home would be you." The room's door opened. Howard's regular doctor entered, then stopped short at the sight of Marcus. "Dr. Thompson? We weren't expecting you until tonight." "Dr. Williams," Marcus straightened, professional once again. "I hope it's okay that I'm reviewing the case." "More than okay." Dr. Williams smiled. "Given your personal connection and impressive record, I'd like you to take the lead on Mr. Mitchell's care." Howard watched the exchange with pride. The scared boy from the river had grown into a confident young doctor, respected by his peers. "First," Marcus said, "I need a moment with my patient." He sat in the chair next to Howard's bed. "Remember when I was 12, and you told me to break big problems down into steps?" Howard nodded. "Well, I've broken down your treatment into steps. And I promise you, we're going to solve this problem together." For the next hour, Marcus reviewed Howard's case with Dr. Williams. His knowledge was impressive, his questions precise. Howard understood now why the residency program had praised him so highly. "Your heart's wearing out," Marcus explained later, after Dr. Williams had left. "But we can manage it with the right combination of treatments." "Always the optimist," Howard said. "I learned from the best." Marcus adjusted Howard's pillows. "A certain teacher once told me anything was possible if you worked hard enough." Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. "I'll get some coffee," she said, leaving them alone. Marcus sat again, this time not as a doctor but as a son. "I've been reading about a new treatment protocol. The success rates are promising." Marcus dash. "We're not giving up?" Marcus's voice was firm. "You didn't give up on me, even when everyone else said you should. Now it's my turn." Howard reached for the young man's hand. "I'm so proud of you, son." The door opened again. Jenny Cooper came in, now the high school principal. "Thought I'd find you here," she said to Marcus. "The Medical Science Club wants to know if you'll speak at their meeting tomorrow." "The club's still going?" Marcus asked. 10 years strong. Your legacy. Howard watched them talk, remembering all the steps that had led here. The river, the tutoring sessions, the science fair, college applications, medical school interviews. Each moment a piece of the bridge they'd built together. Mr. Mitchell. Marcus's voice brought him back. The kids want to hear your story too. About the river. If you're feeling up to it tomorrow. Our story, Howard corrected. And yes, I'd like that. Later that night, after Lisa had gone home and Ginny had left, Marcus stayed to monitor Howard's condition. He sat in the darkness, watching the monitors, just as Howard had once watched him on the bridge. You should rest, Howard said. Doctor's orders. Marcus smiled at the old joke. I'm exactly where I need to be. Howard looked at the young man in his white coat, remembering the boy in the river. Did I ever tell you why I jumped that day? You said anyone would have done it. No. Howard's voice was soft. I jumped because I saw something in you. Something that reminded me of myself at that age. Lost. Angry. Needing someone to believe in you. Marcus wiped his eyes. You did more than believe in me. You showed me who I could become. And look at you now. Dr. Thompson. Thanks to you. Howard shook his head. Thanks to yourself. I just opened the door. You walked through it. They sat in comfortable silence, the monitors beeping steadily. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the town in white. Somewhere out there was a bridge where their story had begun, its railings still standing strong against the current. Get some sleep, Marcus said finally, adjusting Howard's medication. Tomorrow you can tell those kids how one jump in a river changed everything. Changed both of us, Howard corrected. As he drifted off, Howard felt Marcus's hand on his shoulder. Strong, steady, healing. The current had tried to take them once, but they'd learned to swim together. Now, in this hospital room, the circle was complete. A scared boy had become a confident healer. A lonely old man had found a family. And a bridge that once meant danger now stood for something else entirely. The power of believing in someone when no one else would. Howard slept peacefully, knowing he was in good hands. His doctor, his student, his son in all but blood, kept watch through the night, protecting him just as he had once protected a young boy from the river's cold embrace. Spring came early that year. Howard sat in his wheelchair by the hospital window, watching as the last patches of snow melted away. 3 months had passed since Marcus had taken over his care, and his strength was finally returning. Ready for your big day? Marcus asked, entering the room in his white coat. Howard nodded toward the suit hanging on the door. First time wearing real clothes in months. Sure you're not rushing this? Your numbers are good. The new treatment protocol worked better than expected. Marcus checked Howard's chart out of habit. Besides, you can't miss the ceremony. The ceremony. Howard still couldn't believe it. The town council had voted unanimously to rename the bridge where their story began. Today, they would dedicate it as the Mitchell-Thompson Bridge. Still think it's too much fuss, Howard grumbled. The whole town disagrees. Lisa walked in carrying a garment bag. And for once, you're going to let people celebrate you without arguing. She'd brought Howard's old tie, the one he used to wear for student presentations. Marcus helped him put it on while Lisa fussed with his hair. The medical science club's doing the honor guard, Marcus said. Ginny says they've been practicing for weeks. Howard remembered speaking to those students 3 months ago, telling them about the day he jumped into the river. Their eyes had been wide, especially when Marcus explained how that moment had inspired his journey to become a doctor. Transportation's here, Ginny announced from the doorway. She'd organized the whole ceremony, claiming it was the least she could do for her favorite teacher and his star student. They helped Howard into the waiting car. As they drove through town, he noticed how much had changed in 10 years. The diner where Lisa used to work was now a modern cafe. New buildings had sprung up along Main Street. But the river remained the same, flowing steady and strong beneath the bridge that had brought them all together. A crowd had gathered for the ceremony. Howard recognized faces from throughout the years, former students, parents, teachers. Even Officer Reed was there, now retired himself. The mayor stepped up to the podium as Howard's car arrived. Today we honor 2 men who prove that heroism isn't just about one moment of courage, but about the lasting impact of believing in someone. Marcus wheeled Howard to the front row where a space had been reserved. The medical science club stood at attention in their white coats, looking so much like the future doctors they hoped to become. 10 years ago, the mayor continued, Howard Mitchell jumped from this bridge to save a young boy from drowning. But the real story isn't about that jump. It's about what happened after. Howard listened as the mayor recounted their journey, the tutoring sessions, the science fair victories, Marcus's path to medical school. How one act of faith had rippled out to touch countless lives. That boy grew up to become Dr. Marcus Thompson, the mayor said, who has already saved dozens of lives in his young career. And now he's returning home to become chief of emergency medicine at our local hospital, ensuring that our community will benefit from his skills for years to come. This was news to Howard. He turned to Marcus in surprise. Wanted it to be a surprise, Marcus whispered. I'm staying. Going to make sure this town has the medical care it deserves. Howard felt tears forming. Lisa squeezed his hand. But perhaps Dr. Thompson's greatest achievement, the mayor went on, was saving the life of the man who first saved him. When Howard Mitchell's heart began to fail, it was his former student who stepped in with innovative treatments that gave him back his strength. The mayor gestured to the bridge, where workers removed a covering to reveal the new name, Mitchell-Thompson Bridge, where stories cross. Mr. Mitchell, the mayor turned to him. Would you like to say a few words? Marcus wheeled Howard to the podium. Looking out at the crowd, he saw not just faces, but stories. Jenny Cooper, who had helped keep their secret in the early days. Officer Reed, who had learned to see beyond his prejudices. The Medical Science Club members, eyes shining with possibilities. 10 years ago, Howard began, I stood on this bridge and saw a boy in trouble. People ask why I jumped. The truth is, I jumped because 30 years of teaching had taught me something. Sometimes a person just needs to know that someone believes in them. He turned to Marcus. I believed in you that day. But what you've done with that belief, that's all your own achievement. You've become more than I ever dreamed possible. Marcus wiped his eyes as Howard continued. This bridge once represented division in our town, racial, social, economic. Now it stands for something else. The bridges we build between us. The connections that make us stronger. Howard gestured to the Medical Science Club. Look at these young people. 10 years ago, Marcus started this club because he dared to dream of becoming a doctor. Now, they dream because he showed them it's possible. That's how change happens. One person believes, then another, then another. His voice grew stronger. I'm grateful for this honor. But the real honor has been watching this town grow, watching berries fall, watching love prove stronger than fear. Marcus isn't just my student or my doctor. He's my son in every way that matters. And all of you, you're the family we built, one tutoring session, one kind word, one act of faith at a time. The crowd applauded as Marcus hugged Howard. Lisa joined them, forming the family they'd become. Afterward, there was a reception at the hospital where Marcus would be taking over. Howard watched as his son, because that's truly what Marcus had become, showed off the emergency department he would lead. Full circle, Lisa said, standing beside Howard's wheelchair. From the boy who nearly drowned to the man who saves lives. Not just lives, Howard said. He saved this town too. Made it believe in itself again. Jenny brought over a framed photo for the hospital wall. It showed Howard and Marcus on the bridge, not from the day of the rescue, but from years later, both smiling, the river flowing peaceful below them. Know what I think? Marcus said, joining them. I think we should start a scholarship for other kids who dream of becoming doctors. Howard smiled. The Mitchell-Thompson Medical Scholarship, for students who prove that anything is possible with enough determination and support. That night, back in his hospital room for one final check before being released, Howard looked out at the bridge glowing in the evening light. Its new name shone bright against the darkening sky. Marcus came in, no longer in his white coat but in casual clothes. Ready to go home tomorrow. Thanks to you. Thanks to us. Marcus sat beside him. You know, I still go to that bridge sometimes. Stand where you pulled me out. Remember how scared I was that day? How angry at the world. And now I know better. Know that the current isn't stronger than the connections between people. Know that love is stronger than fear. Know that sometimes the best medicine isn't in a pill or procedure. It's in believing in someone until they can believe in themselves. Howard reached for Marcus's hand. We did good, son. We did good, Dad. They sat together, watching the river flow beneath their bridge, its waters reflecting the stars above. The current still moved strong and steady, but they had learned to swim against it together. More than that, they had taught others to swim too. In the end, that was their real legacy, not the name on a bridge or the lives saved in an emergency room, but the ripples of hope that would flow outward forever, touching life after life, proving that love could build bridges stronger than any current that tried to tear them down.